started. Thank everyone for joining us this morning on Thursday, January 28th, 2021 for VC Ag Today. Hope all is well. I know some folks received a little snowfall last night. So for us here in Eastern Virginia, the first snow of the year. This morning's topic of discussion is going to be farm agricultural resources and mediation. And we're joined by some representatives from Farm VA, and they're going to talk a little bit about their organization and the services that they can provide to producers here in Virginia. So we're pleased to be joined by Judith Ogden and Deborah Burke this morning. So thank you both for being with us and taking some time to share some information on Farm VA. Before we get started, just a few rules that we always like to remind folks of. If you could please remain muted throughout the presentation to avoid any background noise, it would be greatly appreciated. If you do have any questions or comments, if you could go ahead and enter those into the chat window throughout the presentation this morning, we'd be glad to address those and answer some questions at the end of the presentation. So please enter those there or write them down, and then you have the opportunity to ask those at the end of the presentation. Thank everyone for joining us again this morning. I see we've got a few folks still trickling in, so we'll continue to allow those folks to enter and we'll go ahead and get started. So Judith and Deborah, thank you again for being with us this morning, and please go ahead, whichever one would like to start.
All right, thank you. Okay, good morning. I'm Judith Ogden. I'm really delighted to be here. We really appreciate the opportunity to speak with all of you. I'm the mediation director, and with me is Deborah Burke, and she is the executive director of our program. So we're going to go through some PowerPoint slides, tell you a little bit about our program. And at the end, I'm sure there'll be time for some questions. So our program is called Farm VA. It's Farm Agricultural Resources and Mediation in Virginia. And let me start with, okay, the slides aren't moving. So there it is. Okay. There seems to be a little lull before the slides open up, but so the way we got started is between 1981 and 1986, as probably some of you know, U.S. farmers experienced the worst financial crisis they'd seen since the Great Depression. So in response, Congress had passed the Agricultural Credit Act of 1987. And one of the things this act did was to establish agricultural mediation programs in the various states. Now, not all states have a program. The great majority do, but it's up to the state if they really want to have a mediation program like this. And of course, Virginia does. So these mediation programs are federally funded, and the intent was that the programs would help farmers avoid foreclosure and bankruptcy by using mediation and hopefully coming up with a loan restructuring. Initially, we could also mediate cases where the Farm Service Agency would not make a loan, where a loan was denied. And these two topics are still mediated in the program, and we'll see that it's expanded a lot since 1987. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what mediation is. Oftentimes I find that people don't really understand what mediation is, and so they're not going to be too anxious to use it if they don't really know what they're getting into. But in mediation, a third party assists disputants in arriving at a mutually agreeable result. And that third party, who's called a mediator, is completely neutral. They're not a party to the dispute. They have no interest in the dispute. They also do not provide legal advice. Now, sometimes mediators are lawyers and sometimes they're not, but regardless, they're not there to provide legal advice. And so if that's what you need to get an outside lawyer to provide any legal advice. And the mediator doesn't dictate the result. They don't decide the outcome. So really what's going on is the parties are really negotiating, and the mediator is there to just assist you. So for whatever reason, sometimes parties couldn't come to a resolution when they were just speaking to each other. And having a third party there oftentimes assists in the process. And so mediation is oftentimes referred to as assisted negotiation. So some of the things that make mediation attractive is, first of all, it's confidential. So anything that is said in mediation is not to be repeated afterwards, which is important. If you're not able to settle in mediation, then it's as if the mediation never happened. Everything is confidential. And so there is no requirement that the parties settle. It's just an opportunity to try to come to a resolution. But the parties don't have to settle. The mediator will force you to settle. And if the parties cannot settle, all other dispute resolution methods remain available. So if you have a situation where perhaps you got a denial letter from the FSA, and you think it's wrong and you want to appeal it, you probably first ask for a reconsideration, and then at that point you can appeal, or you can sort of step aside and go to mediation and see if the dispute can be resolved in mediation, and that's where we come in. If, however, you cannot resolve it in mediation, then you go back to the process as though the mediation never happened. You can still appeal to the appeal division. And so there really are no penalties in using the mediation. You go on as though as though it never took place. And so why do people mediate? And we usually compare mediation most often to the courts, to litigation. Sometimes we compare it to arbitration, because a lot of times loan documents or lease documents will have an arbitration clause where they require the parties to go to arbitration if there's a dispute. And sometimes that's a good way to handle it. But when we compare mediation to these other methods, mediation is economical. It's very inexpensive. And if you're using our mediation program, there's no fee. It's fast. There's a rapid settlement. The parties meet and they resolve it, or they don't. So you're not tied up waiting for a hearing date, or waiting for a court date. The results are mutually satisfactory. They're comprehensive and customized agreements. I like to tell my students that in mediation, you can agree to anything you want as long as it's not illegal. Now, you don't want to agree to something that's unethical or dishonest, but you can come up with a resolution that works for the two parties, that you could never get in court or anywhere else. It can be creative, it can be unique, it works for the two of you. And it's something, of course, you'd never get if you went to court. If you go to court, somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose, and somebody may be in default, and the lender forecloses. But anything the two parties agree to in mediation is possible. And so consequently, in mediation, we have a really high rate of compliance, because the results can be something different. And people feel personally empowered, because it's not a matter of the mediator doesn't tell the parties, this is what you have to agree to. The result is something that they came up with and they agreed to. So our program is the Virginia Farm Agricultural Resources and Mediation Program. And we're funded primarily by the USDA. And we get additional financial support from Western Carolina University. And what we do is provide free mediation services for a variety of disputes. So the disputes can include those with USDA lenders and other farm credit institutions and other agricultural lenders. And as the program has been expanded, We now are able to resolve disputes resulting from adverse decisions concerning wetland determinations, conservation reserve programs, crop disaster assistance programs, environmental quality incentive programs, and also the National Organic Program. And we mediate disputes between producers and other agencies, including rural development, the National Forest Service, the Natural Resource Conservation Services, and also risk management. And most recently, the legislation has expanded our services to include mediation for disputes involving leases, which we've already seen, disputes with neighbors. You know, one neighbor is doing something that impacts the other. Those could be brought to mediation. And also a topic that's become very important and of great interest is farm transition issues. And I'm going to say a little bit about that, excuse me, a little bit more. Really, these are just some of the basics of farm succession. Our mediators can have a role in this, although I believe you still need to talk to your attorney before you do anything final, and you may even need to talk to your accountant. So I got much of this information from Andrew Brannon, an attorney who is on our advisory board. So basically, there are three ways to transfer assets. You can sell them, they can pass at your death, or you can make a gift to somebody. And there's all three of these have tax consequences. So that's the reason when you're trying to decide how to transfer the assets, you want to talk to your attorney and maybe your accountant, because they can be treated differently for tax purposes. These are the ways that real property, so real estate basically, can be owned. You could have a life estate, which means you own it for your life. You pay the taxes, you collect rent if you're renting it out. You're not allowed to waste the property. You can't run it, run it into the ground, so to speak. You have to maintain it because at the end of your life estate, it's going to revert to someone else. You can own property as tenants in common, and we treat it as though each owner has an undivided interest in the entire parcel, which is, we call this a legal fiction. That would be impossible to be true, but that's how we view it from a legal perspective. And you could own different percentages of the property. It doesn't have to be 50-50. It could be 1/3, 2/3, could be whatever the parties agree to. You can also have joint tenancy with the right of survivorship. You don't see this as often in land. As the slide indicates, it's more common with bank accounts and stocks. So what you have now is it's like a tenancy in common with the right of survivorship. When one owner dies, the survivor owns the whole thing. The survivor automatically inherits. So with most land, this doesn't happen automatically. You have to set it up so that there's a right of survivorship. If you just have a regular tenancy in commons, there's not a right of survivorship. That would have to be on the deed. There's also tenancy by the entireties, or sometimes we call it entireties property. And this is property purchased during a legal marriage. So this is husband and wife. And what makes it a little bit different is that with entireties property, we assume that there's a right of survivorship. Now, again, that doesn't have to be. You can set it up differently, but generally with entireties property, the spouses will inherit when the other spouse passes away. And then you can have other interests in property like the timber, which can be severed, or you can give somebody the right to hunt on your property or to farm on your property. There can also be a right of partition. Tenants in common have a right to partition the land or, request that it be divided. And so sometimes this is the subject of a dispute. So this is sort of an overview of the planning process. These are the things you want to think about. Well, what is it that you really want? What's your vision for the future for your family, for the land and the business. And what things do you have? What do you own? Do you have do you have any liquid resources? What about family resources, documentation? Are there any community resources? And what is it that you need? Do you need to come up with some financial resources? And are you going to need to draft an asset transfer plan? And this is, how you're going to dispose of the property. And this is what you need to talk about ultimately with your attorney and or accountant. But maybe you can talk to some of our mediators first. So we mentioned there's 3 ways to dispose of property. You can just give it away, make a gift. You can give it away, you can give the whole thing away, or you can just give somebody a life estate. You can sell the property, or of course you can distribute property to your heirs by will. And you can either give everybody an equal share, or you can make specific distributions where they get, something specific and different amounts. Another thing you can do is transfer property to a trust. You can do this during your life, or it can pass at your death. So you could make a provision in your will that the property is transferred to a trust. And so some people, even during their life, rather than setting up like a limited liability company, like on the next line, they transfer it to a trust. And what's the best thing to do, again, is something you need to discuss with your attorney. So you can either transfer it to a trust, or you can transfer it to some sort of business entity like a limited liability company, which has become more common in, since I guess the second half of the 20th century, to set up a limited liability company. But, I've seen situations where producers try to set up a limited liability company, and it's not that it's a bad idea, but they didn't really understand all the ramifications. So again, you may need, before you do this, you may need some professional advice to make sure that you're doing it properly. So if we're not giving legal advice, what can we do? Well, we can help resolve disputes arising from a partition request. So before perhaps you go to court and order or have the court judge order a partition, you might want to come to an agreement between the 2 of you. And another thing we can do is work with the owner and family members to examine options and determine the best solution for having the farm survive. Once I'm gone, who's going to do the farming? Who's going to do whatever? And some people want to share in the farm, but they don't want to do the work. And so that's something that you need everybody to get together and talk about. And the mediators can help with this. They can conduct probably what's more like a facilitation and get all the parties together and talk about what some of the best solutions might be before you draft anything. So where and how do we hold mediations? Well, historically, mediators always like to do mediations in person. They like to do them face to face. But of course, with the pandemic, that's been a little bit more of a problem. So we try to be as flexible as we can, and we'll do what the parties feel comfortable with. So we've done mediations online using Zoom or some other software. We've done mediations over the phone where there's a kind of a conference call mediation, and we have done them in person using safe distances and face masks. And of course, this is where the parties are agreeable. We wouldn't force anyone to do that. And some mediations have just had to be delayed. These are some of the typical mediations that we see. Probably a large number have to do with farm loans. We've also had some mediations dealing with housing loans with rural development. We've seen mediations involving whether or not the producer was eligible for the wildfire and hurricane indemnity program payments. and also mediations where it was determined that the producer was not eligible for crop program and fiscal year benefits because they weren't engaged in farming. So in addition to problems with farm loans, what we see frequently is someone is trying to qualify for some benefit or certificate or designation, and they didn't meet the requirements, and so we go into mediation. And oftentimes these can be very productive because the parties can spend a lot of time talking about what they need to do to qualify, which sometimes they haven't done before. And we've also seen equipment leases and mediations involving a lease dispute. So I'm going to ask in a minute if there are any questions. I'm going to skip to the next slide and show you this is our contact information. We have a web page and my email address and phone number, and Deborah's email address and phone number. So feel free to contact us if you want some information, and if you want to, you want to request a mediation. If you get a denial letter from the FSA, it'll include my name and contact information. But if you don't have that, or you can't find it, on our webpage, we have a form that you can fill out, but you don't have to use that. All you have to do is send me a written request, and make sure you include your contact information. That sounds obvious, but I had a case the other day where I got a letter and a request, but the woman didn't include her mailing address, her email address, or her phone number. So it took me a little bit of time to find her. And if you got a denial letter, make sure you include your denial letter with your request, because that tells us, who you dealt with and what the case is really about. But feel free to contact us with any questions. So I don't know, maybe I should get out. I probably should get out of the sharing. This is the end of the slides, and then just take any questions that we have, and Deb and I will try to answer. So were there any questions in chat, or are there any live questions?
All right, thank you so much for sharing the presentation and being with us this morning. And I just was checking the chat window. I don't see any questions in the chat. So for any participants on the call this morning, if you have any questions or comments on the presentation, please go ahead and feel free to unmute yourself at this time to ask those.
I have a question real quick. If we have farmers say that it's a neighbor dispute kind of situation, do they just need to go online and fill out that form and try to basically explain the situation the best they can? Or what's some best steps if it's something that's not related to the USDA?
So what would it be related to, I guess?
It would be like the neighbor disputes, or it would
well,
be.
Yeah, they could just really, they can just contact me. They can email me or call me or mail to me if they want. Just tell me just send me a letter saying I'm requesting mediation and this is what it's about, in a sentence or two. And we'll be in touch with them to get more information, and because we're going to have to, we may be willing to do the mediation. We're going to have to get the neighbor to agree to mediation too. And sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. So we're going to have to contact the neighbor too. So email, phone number. Email is always best because I'm always checking my email. But a letter, anything, just contact me and let me know, and we'll need the neighbor's information. But it doesn't have to be a particular form. We probably have to have something in writing because that's just the process. But is that enough of an answer, or did you have other questions?
Yes.
Yeah, just contact us, send us an email is great. It'll be in writing, and tell us who to contact and we'll get in touch with you.
All right, any other questions for our guest speakers this morning? I don't see anything else in the chat still, so if anybody else has any questions or comments. All right, well, I don't hear anything else, so if you do think of questions or have any additional requests after the presentation this morning, please feel free to reach out to either Judith and Deborah, to their contacts, or contact your local extension agent. We'll be glad to get you in touch with the folks there at Farm VA and hopefully help you get your situation mediated. So thank you again, Judith and Deborah. We appreciate you both being with us this morning and sharing those comments and letting us learn a little bit more about Farm VA and what you all are doing there, and how we can direct our producers to those services if that would be beneficial for them. So thank you both for being with us again this morning.
Well, you're certainly welcome, and we appreciate everybody who attended the presentation. And let us know if you have any questions.